Let's just set up the microphone and get a little soothing voice ready for the absolute nonsense that's about to be had here. I'm going to be talking as calmly as I think I possibly can, so that no one can tell when I was typing in all caps. Warning, the following video contains some mild swearing and one incredibly circumstantial argument that is bound to make people angry.
Kira versus Lelouch. The two are not similar. To say so is just an insult to Lelouch.
They both suck, but I bet Light could beat Lelouch in a fistfight.
Who in the ever-living is that relevant, you ignorant dump?
Did you mean to say how?
Yes, typos are fun, but still, how is it relevant?
This post says Lelouch is better in every way, so I pointed out that he's a pansy in a physical confrontation.
The post never says Lelouch is physically stronger, and Lelouch as a character is not strong, and the story never claims that he is. If that's all Kira has on him, that proves the OC's point.
They mean the original poster? Oh no, Light is definitely a better character. They're both arrogant jackasses, but Lelouch is so boring it's sad.
So you don't like smart anime characters who fight with strategies and not their fists? Kirito must be a true badass in your eyes.
You sure like jumping to conclusions. Lelouch might have some sort of moral high ground in terms of motivation and means, but that doesn't make him a good character. Light is stronger, smarter, and better written.
Light isn't better written at all, and motivation is a huge piece of what makes Lelouch such a great character, and the fact that that doesn't favor in him, as the ending shows, is just incredible, unlike someone else.
Something tells me that I could write an essay explaining my reasoning and you wouldn't even read it because you think you're so right about this.
I would gladly read it because if somehow you manage a way to show your reasonings that he would be better than Lelouch that makes any sense, that I would be unable to give my reasoning to why he isn't in return would be great. But one, I have a feeling that essay was an empty threat, and I highly doubt that I wouldn't be able to come back with a good response, but go ahead, give it a shot.
If you insist. Don't hold your breath though, this will take some time to put together properly.
Thumbs up.
This is a troll, right? I've just been responding to a troll. I'm actively fact-checking and writing an essay because I got triggered by a troll. Yeah, that's gotta be it. But you know what? Regardless of whether or not this original post or the person accusing me of so much as having watched Sword Art Online is simply doing it for the lulz, this was a lot of fun to write. You wanted an essay, so here's your essay, complete with illustrations and memes. I guess I should put a trigger warning here. Bear this heavily in mind as I go forward. People will be offended somehow, in some way, by something that I have to say, and I don't give a flying fig. Well, it's not really worth the time to simply respond to a single person who got triggered on Pinterest. I figure this debate is always up for grabs in the anime community. It has been since both of the shows premiered almost side by side back in the day, so I figured, why not stir up some controversy? Comparing these two anime characters comes about mostly from the fact that, as stated above, their series were premiering very closely to each other in the fall anime season of 2006. The most basic aspect of the two that is considered the same about them is that in their respective series the two are considered geniuses and are known for their tactics and mental gymnastics that they use to manipulate others towards world-changing ends using an alias as the figurehead. Oh, they also both have little sisters, but the surface-level similarities end there. What really got me with this little post is the final statement. I have to ask, is it really an insult to Lelouch v Britannia to compare him to Light Yagami? No, there's some insult to be had here, but the simple comparison itself is not it. There is enough common ground for us to take an in-depth look at both characters and eventually come to the conclusion that Light is actually the better written one. What? I hope regular watchers didn't think I was going to be impartial after this little exchange. However, for future reference, I have watched both of these shows, and I hate both of these characters, but there is a point that I need to make, so my bias will be showing, but only in kind response to the bias that is being shown in this meme. It wouldn't be much of a debate if I sat on the fence anyway. I stated my points above, and I intend to make them as apparent as possible. Now, comparison and contrast is one of the most basic essay forms in existence. This was drafted the same night this conversation ended. It just took some time to draw up the picture as seen here. I apologize to my opponent for taking so long, but I did warn you that time would be a factor. Life gets busy. And you don't exactly take precedent. We'll go ahead and break down this post in question, inch by inch, because I just have to point out how incredibly unfair and unrepresentative this little meme is of both characters.
Kira versus Lelouch.
Why not start with the names here? Why is the poster using Light Yagami's alias and leaving Lelouch's real name at the top? There's this thing about writing that requires consistency, but I'm willing to bet that someone who favors Lelouch is more than willing to use Light's alias to make him look worse by comparison. After all, it is derived from the word killer to his own chagrin. To make this consistent, I'll change Light's name here because we should be comparing the characters by name and not by their projected revolutionary personas. The stupidity starts early. I half expected to find someone below this post talking about how lame Light's alias is compared to Lelouch's. Luckily that didn't happen. We don't need more inane elements added to this farce.
Power, a magic book that is useful for nothing but murder. Bending people to his will.
At its base, there is nothing wrong with the statement of the Death Note as a murder tool, because that is what it is. However, I will have to point out that while death is always a certainty when one writes in the Death Note, Light was able to utilize it in ways that allowed him to do much more with it than end just a single person's life. So much so to the point where he even impresses a god of death with his ability to skirt the rules. Were those means always to the effect of killing people anyway? Yes. Let's not act like Light Yagami wasn't a psychopathic megalomaniac. But his tenacity allowed him to manipulate others using the Death Note up until the moments of the death he specified. Next, the Geass is accurately described in short. It does indeed allow Lelouch to impose his will into one command that those who make eye contact with him must obey to any end. He also uses his wits to use this to the fullest of his abilities. It's really not as though the two powers have any initial which is better. Both can be used to kill, and cause other people to do things against their wills, but one has precedent over the other in their given series. The Death Note has a consequence that Light has to accept in order to justify using it, and the Geass has a side effect that makes it more difficult to use, and has lasting effects on the story as a result. Given who are in possession of these powers, both making the most of them, the comparison as it is presented seems inappropriate. If your argument really comes down to one is a tool for murder, we can go into the semantics of what the first thing Lelouch did with his Geass was versus what the first thing Light did with the Death Note, if you'd like.
Motive: enslaving the earth. Exacting vengeance.
Once again, the original poster phrases this in ways that seem to favor Lelouch more than Light. When you say enslaving the earth, the implication is entirely evil, while exacting vengeance sounds like a more noble motivation, because for what reason would our main character need revenge other than if he were severely wronged? Unless it was a petty revenge, because, those exist as well. So let's change the phrasing on this again. Ridding the world of evil, and removing a dictator from power. When we say it like this, once again the motivations of the two really don't look all that different, do they? The real difference is here. Light Yagami is not a good person, and the series called Death Note does not try to make him out as one. While his motivation as he explains it seems noble, most sane people can take a look at it and say, wait, what? Light Yagami, the instant he decided to use the Death Note, became an egomaniac whose beautiful ideal that looks great on paper in actuality involves him becoming the sole proprietor of life and death of all humanity. Only Light and his fanatic followers, people who are also insane, think that it is a good idea for a single human to have all that power. And if nothing else, Death Note speaks to the point about what it is that absolute power does. Light Yagami is the protagonist, but he is not a hero. Contrarily, Lelouch, who seeks the death of his father, vengeance for the death of his mother, and a safe world for his sister, is set up as an anti-hero-style protagonist. While his frenemy, Suzaku, is around to be his foil and in-world contrast to how and why he executes the plans he does, Lelouch himself is never set up to be questioned by the audience for his actions. Lelouch v. Britannia is written to be supported and cheered for by the audience, and not be questioned, even though the systematic deaths of others is also a part of his long-term plan. His goal looks nobler given his position, but it involves usurping the world order just as much as Light's does.
Relations. Could not have given less of a about anyone else. Thought only of killing the only friend he had. Actually gave up about other people. Ordered his best friend to live even though he was an obstacle.
Light Yagami is an ignoble bastard. I assume that the only friend referred to in this statement is L, and of course he was trying to kill him. They were trying to kill each other. What makes Death Note the series that hooked so many shonen readers, despite being so different from the form of the typical stories written for the demographic, is the mind games. The four-dimensional chess that goes on between the two, and the edge-of-your-seat non-action that is their battle. Friendship is a non-factor. It was always fake, and again, it's more than a major oversight to have to completely ignore that. Light early on says he's willing to kill his family if it means reaching godhood. It's all perfectly in character. Then we have Lelouch. The only thing he has is family, Nunnally specifically. As the series goes on, it becomes almost comical how the only thing that he cares about is making the world around him safe for his little sister to live in. It's noble, yes, but from a practical standpoint, it becomes increasingly apparent that by having these connections, he has more places he can be attacked from. In fact, the more things you care about, the more weaknesses you have when you are trying to run a revolution for any cause. Sad as it is, Lelouch's escapades put more people in danger, proportionally by association with him, and potentially being found out than Light. Because the Light doesn't care and is willing to get rid of those connections himself, to the point where he got his dad killed and his sister wheelchair-bound, hey, it wasn't a hindrance to him, because he's an ignoble bastard. Besides the results of these familial relations, living statuses by the end of the series, there isn't any comparison to be made here. This much is true. To summarize, Lelouch cared because he's a force for the greater good, and that can be used against him. Light didn't care because he was a force for his own nefarious schemes, and no individual could be used against him as a result. Not even himself.
Followers. His goth fangirl and a guy that loved killing. Every single Japanese freedom fighter.
Wrong. Not completely wrong, but still incorrect. Let us use the word allies rather than followers here for the sake of the point this individual seems to be trying to make. If one were to use the word followers, Light has the advantage having his enigmatic presence start a worldwide cult that followed him without so much as having a face to him or even getting directions from him. He only made direct contact with and allied himself completely with the bimbo goth idol Misa Amane and with the fanatical Teru Mikami, who was honored to be a follower of Kira and chosen one to do his bidding. As far as allies went, Light couldn't have chosen any better to suit his needs. In his position, as stated before, relationships are liabilities. He cannot chance being betrayed, and for what it's worth, he never is. He may have erred in mistaking the Shinigami Ryuk as an ally in the late game, but that is neither here nor there. Light's allies, in terms of sheer number, are not reflective of his effectiveness as a leader, but they are fewer than those of Lelouch. Speaking of whom, calling the Japanese revolutionaries freedom fighters again is a very specific speech used to paint him in a more positive light than, well, Light. Under the guise of Zero, he did get the Japanese revolutionary forces to do his bidding with minimal use of his Gyas, and if you consider all of them to be his allies versus his followers, he does have the numbers advantage.
Success! Made the world live in fear for a few years, but never achieved his goal. Got his vengeance and took over Britannia on top of it.
Light's goal was to become a god of the New World Order, a thing which is objectively impossible if you're taking him literally. Oh wait, this is working specifically off of the phrasing that he desired to enslave the entire Earth, so we're not even on the same level here. Let's just say it now, Light succeeded. Again, we seem to want to completely ignore the worldwide cult that existed to serve and praise him as the New World God. This cult went on to perpetuate the fact that he did in fact exist, even when he was finally defeated, and he did change the world as he set out to do. He might not have made it to the final endgame, where he would have been so powerful and so in charge of everything and the lives of every person on Earth that he would not have to answer for his crime until after his lifespan was finished. But he did become a god to a fanatical cult and defeated his greatest rival, 5 years before that cult even became prominent. Light's actions had lasting effects, so I'd say he was successful, just not to the degree that satisfied him, but we'll return to that later. Back to Lelouch, he too was successful, certainly more so than Light. He got what he wanted, took over the whole damn world, and got his sister permanent protection on top of that. I have no denial here, in terms of how far they got and reaching their goals, Lelouch wins without question. How he got to that point is a story beyond rational comprehension, but looking exclusively at the results, Lelouch wins.
Death. Ran away like a little bitch and died of bullet wounds, believing everything he had done was always in the right. Realized his own sins and intentionally made himself the villain so he could end the cycle by being killed by the very hero he created.
Oh no, here comes my favorite tangent. This only works if you honest-to-goodness believe with all of your being that Lelouch died at the end of Code Geass. I don't, and that ruins any point we have here. Among all the mess that was R2, the story gave an expressed way that made it entirely possible, more than entirely possible, that Lelouch is not even dead after his planned assassination. I believe that they wouldn't have included that little piece about swapping up the Geass for immortality if it wasn't going to be used. Best case scenario with this argument, I'm right, even ignoring the Lelouch of the Resurrection movie that came out earlier this year. Worst case scenario, I argue with you about the open end of the show until we are both blue in the face. Neither officially dead nor expressly alive, I cannot accept that Lelouch sacrificed himself for the greater good when there was a distinct possibility that he didn't have to. If he is in fact a genius, he would have known and acknowledged that possibility, and would have had to have made the decision to actively ignore it in the name of his ideal world, to be a tragic hero, as the series wants you to believe him to be. I can't do that. I have no reason to believe that Lelouch wouldn't get out of a fatal situation and move on with his life as an immortal if that were presented to him along with achieving his ultimate goal. He is not that noble. He is an anti-hero, not a hero. Prove me wrong. But yes, to address the Kira side of the argument, Light died like a bitch, as is appropriate. Given everything that went on in Death Note, up until that point, it had to happen. He believed he was right, yes, but because he was a psychopath. More on that later. For now, let's just say this, and really make people mad. Based off of my perception of the finale of Code Geass, these two are similar in a way that people really don't want them to be. Both Light and Lelouch acted like they were willing to accept the consequences of their actions, but in the end neither was prepared to do that. Light says he was willing to accept the rules of the Death Note, including those regarding his own death, but in the end pleads for Ryuk to help him not die or at least take his enemies with him. Lelouch plays his cards in just the right way so that he can look like a hero but never has to sacrifice himself for his ultimate goal, and in the best case scenario for him, he can live forever without having to deal with any of it, with the responsibility of being Zero now foisted onto Suzaku, who also protects his sister. Okay, having addressed the major points here, let's just take a step back and get to the real argument we started. Light Yagami is stronger, smarter, and better written than Lelouch v. Britannia. Point 1. Stronger. Physically, because that is what the conversation became about. I don't think anyone will argue with that. Light is something of an athlete, and we watched him hand to foot to face L, whereas Lelouch has been repeatedly stated to be a pansy. Not good at sports and things like that. There's no contest, and for some reason this triggered someone enough that I feel the need to explain it in this video. Point 2. Smarter. The second and third points tie together very closely, so pay attention. What the IQs of these two characters are doesn't matter, so keep those to yourself. Again, this is why people compare the two of them, mostly because they're both geniuses, so why would I say that Light is smarter? Because he was prepared for everything. Light is written to be cunning, conniving, manipulative, and untrustworthy. Light takes precautions. He acknowledges the risks he's taking, assesses his enemies, acknowledges their positions against him as a threat, and concedes even small losses where they occur, and tends to throw fits when he loses. It's kind of funny, actually. Even in his experimentation, he is constantly in the heads of his opponents. He's playing mind games against someone at his level or higher who has more resources and allies than he does, and he wins. It takes multiple individuals of similar caliber to follow that up, years later, to finally outwit him and bring him to his knees. He picked his proxies carefully, never trusted anyone completely who he knew could betray him, and doesn't forget the rules he started with. Lelouch, on the other hand, plays normal chess and then tries to apply these same tricks twice in a row to a real battlefield as if that would actually work. In the same vein of stupidity that is Light admitting to a former FBI agent out loud that he is Kira, we get Zero, who supposedly has a brain, completely neglecting the one warning label he got for his power in the late game. It gives us the most contrived and cringy turn of fate that just needed to happen in Code Geass, because otherwise everything was just going too smoothly. People learn his identity by mistake. He's almost outed by a cat, takes too many risks regarding his allies with no guarantee that they won't betray him, and they are constantly questioning him. Light needs the amount of forethought to know ahead of time exactly when, where, and how to use the Death Note, because as we've seen in the finale, trying to whip it out and use it when the tide goes south doesn't work. He has to play smarter or risk getting caught. Lelouch, on the other hand, can just whip out his Geass at any time he wants to and come up with some ludicrous plan on the fly to get out of any given situation. Something Code Geass as a story suffers from. The example of how he cares for his relations in particular gives us an example of this, actually. It's a very poor example of how much he cares because in the spur of that moment that he told Suzaku to live, he wasn't just saving his friend, he was saving his own damn hide. Suzaku was willing to die in order to capture, expose, or otherwise kill Zero, and Lelouch couldn't have that. He almost had his identity uncovered at this instance as well. Telling Suzaku to live got both of them the hell out of there, so it's not nearly as selfless as the original poster tries to make it seem. Also, it makes Suzaku's life hell, and Lelouch continues to take advantage of it. He is no saint. Lelouch's plans go south 50% of the time due to the fact that he doesn't have the same amount of forethought that Light has because he doesn't need it. He has a power to get himself unscrewed out of any situation he gets himself screwed into, with the exception of season finales. Have I made any sense yet? Light has to be smarter because the story he's in requires it. Lelouch's smarts get him into trouble, and that's how he manages to turn a situation that he loused up around that makes him look like a genius. Relatively rarely does everything go all according to Keikaku for Lelouch, and he's not even playing against people who are at the same IQ level as he is. He is bested by people who have more real-time tactical experience than he does, and people who can run faster. Light is bested by people who are either more genius than him, or people who are so idiotic that it is impossible for anyone to predict how they will act in any given situation. To quote someone who I know on the matter, Lelouch plays turn-based while Light plays real-time. Point 3. Last and certainly not least, I say that Light is a better written character. My dear friend who was commenting at me seems to be under the impression that the original poster was. That Lelouch's moral superiority in both motivation and execution of his plans makes him a better character, and that's just not true. The truth is that Lelouch doesn't remain a consistent character throughout the series. Now aside, consistency is not to be confused with development of character. Another similarity between Lelouch and Light is that neither of them is a dynamic character. There is not a significant change in either of them from beginning to end. They start with a single goal and keep heading towards that goal with barely a blink at what happens in the meantime. Anything that does affect them only spurs them forward on their original paths. But at least Light is consistent in that he never changes. Code Geass, on the other hand, likes to act like Lelouch changes and then reneges on it. Remember specifically about Lelouch choosing his allies. Somewhere between Lelouch and Zero and Suzaku, the Kingdom of Britannia, the Japanese revolutionaries, etc., we've lost who is all in alignment with whom. Continuously switching hands is not change, it's just convoluted white noise to make the story seem deep, when it's really just unnecessarily complicated. Without calling the kettle black, the plot of Death Note also gets convoluted, but again, at least the characters remain themselves, and you don't have to worry about changing your opinions of them based off of whether they are acting like a good guy or a bad guy from an episode to another. What is an insult is not comparing Light to Lelouch. The insult, in comparing the two, is implying that you believe people see them as moral equals, and then you roll with that. Contrary to this meme of a post, they are in fact similar, but they were never meant to be the same. They aren't even the same archetype. To think that just because they are both smart and the main characters in their own respective series, but are meant to be the same person in different situations but with different God-given powers, is absolutely ridiculous. That can't be what this person is thinking, right? They can't be under the impression that Light and Lelouch are compared to each other as though they fulfill the same role in their respective series. Well, I don't know, it might have to be. Only an idiot, or perhaps a very naive child, would look at Light Yagami and say, well, he's the main character, so he must be the good guy. No. Light is the bad guy. Nowhere in the story of Death Note is anyone trying to convince you that Light Yagami is a good person. Except Light Yagami, of course, and if he's doing that, he's probably planning to kill you too. Of course, Lelouch has better motivations. He's an anti-hero. Not a traditional hero meant to save everyone and sacrifice himself for the greater good, but a guy who is trying to get to his own end while doing what is widely considered to be the right thing in the process. You are supposed to question Light. You're not supposed to side with him solely because he's the main character. His actions are objectively heinous. He's a murderer. He killed more people by hand than Lelouch has by accidental nuclear warfare. The point of Death Note as a story is to see how this man will be foiled, and justice will be done to him in the end. But he's just so convincingly written that there are people who read this manga and watch this anime and actually thought that he was doing the right thing. That's how strong his convictions were, and that's why it's so satisfying to watch him get shot by the second dumbest character in the entire series. He freaks out, he's humiliated, he screams and throws fits and bleeds out like a bitch as Ryuk finally finishes their deal by writing his name in the Death Note. His end is one he gets, because it's what he deserves, and not because he's a poor character. On the exact opposite side of the alignment spectrum, you're not supposed to question Lelouch. He is the main character. He's the good guy. You are supposed to want him to win. You are supposed to believe that everything will work out in his favor and that he will make it to his goal by the end, because that is the proper outcome. Which is why it is noble, tragic, and satisfying to watch him vilify himself to unite humanity against a single threat. Then he has himself sacrificed in the name of a peaceful world, where his sister can finally live safely and happily. But as I've explained, that ending is ruined if you can't be absolutely convinced that that is exactly what happened. Also, let's face facts, the world can only be perfect for so long before someone else screws up, but we have to believe that that'll take at least another decade or so. Kira may have left scars on the earth, but I guarantee that they'll last longer than the faux sense of peace established by Lelouch that I insist he abandoned once given the chance. Regardless, Lelouch is the good guy, and Light is the bad guy. Where on earth does anyone get off thinking their motivations, morals, or final deaths are meant to determine which one of them was better written? The two of them are not meant to be compared as though they are both heroes. One of them is meant to die in the name of justice, and the other is made out to die for the sake of freedom. Who do you think is the better person? Certainly not the bad guy. The two contrast. Don't compare their morals and motives. There isn't a contest. It's incredibly one-sided. In fact, if Lelouch's motivation is such a large part of what makes him a compelling character, then maybe saying he's better than someone whose supernatural power can only result in murder is a weak example. It's almost as though you're looking for low-hanging fruit to make Lelouch seem more amazing than he is. If you look at them closer, even those things are not as different as people want to think. What say you? Perhaps that a static but upstanding hero will always be better written as a character than a dynamic and cunning villain whose end comes to a satisfying conclusion? I think we're done here. Lelouch v. Britannia is pretty obviously a better person than Light Yagami, but Light Yagami is by and large a better character than Lelouch v. Britannia. In conclusion, let us just be reminded that they are both arrogant jackholes who deserve to die, and in the end only one of them did. So go ahead, be the judge here. Thank you very much for watching this video, all the way through to the end. With any luck, some of it made sense, but I know there are plenty of people who can argue their counterpoints, and I welcome them to try. If we can, please try to keep the comments civil. Other than that, feel free to say whatever you want on the matter. This was almost therapeutic. Maybe I'll make more videos like this in the future, who knows? For now, that'll be all, people of Earth and elsewhere. I hope you have a nice day, and remember, this is the hairdo of jackhole genius protagonists. Goodbye.